a link to a video that Kathy Malott did on the use of tile grout, and she ends up ultimately with sanded grout because she put sand into it. But I just note that link was sent here within the last week, and anybody who wants to pick up on that, there's a place to go. The basic thing is that you have better color control than you do with natural dirt.
That would have been in the NMRA turntable that
Yeah.
Paul Volcker puts out.
The general consensus on natural dirt, and I haven't tried it because I got scared away from it, but Joe sure agrees with this, is the colors are just all wrong. They look great out in sunlight. You bring them into the basement and everything's different. So I know people that have brought back tons of natural sand from Cajon Pass, put it on their layout. Ted York is one. And it's just totally useless. And he ended up going to some white sand, using some white sand from his neighbor's foundation, I think. Anyway.
Generally, natural materials darken with the way that we affix them.
Right.
So that's a problem unless you're trying to model wet conditions anyway.
Well, this is even above and beyond that. If you just take the dry stuff right off of the ground and bring it in and put it on the layout. Now, this is just what I've been told by quite a few people. It doesn't look right.
Unless you're running a garden railroad, you do not have natural sunlight in your layout room.
Exactly. Yeah, it's all lighting. Yes.
Paul Scholes, who I think we all know is a pretty outstanding modeler, the late Paul Scholes, in one of his DVD how-to productions, he actually shows himself driving up to a pass outside Seattle and digging up some gravel and using it on his layout. So he did it pretty successfully.
Okay, I've got a story on that one. Back from when the PNR was in Everett a few years back, he did a clinic on that, and he uses it basically as terrain base more than anything else. But he ran into where he needed a whole bunch of that decomposed granite for some project. I think it was actually a commission by a magazine. He was running up against a deadline. His place up on Highway 2 where he got it, was totally snowed in. And so he was getting very grumpy. He got grumpy to his wife. She went shopping. And she brought home a 50-pound bag of paver sand and said, "Would this work?" And he looked at it and realized it was the exact same stuff, and you can get it for $2.50 a bag at Home Depot.
Yeah.
And that's what he was using for his clinic. I now have about 50 pounds of the stuff on my layout, actually.
All
You
right.
just have to screen it through a suitably fine screen. I used one of the window screens off of a window that was replaced by a door on my house. The big chunks turn into talus. Hi, Ross.
Hello, how are you guys?
Doing well.
You picked a Saturday I didn't have to work, so thank you.
How's life in Kia land?
You know, just busier than anything. It continues to just be crazy. So who would have thunk it?
What do you have for a layout?
I have about a 10 by 12 square or rectangular HON3 layout,
Okay.
which is right there.
Has Russ up in 4th Division grabbed you yet?
There's part of it.
Looks nice.
I think we
Thank you.
need a layout tour out of you.
Okay. Yes, Russ got a hold of me and I thought I'd do a quick video. And it turns out there's a lot more to just doing a quick video than doing a quick video. So
This is true.
And
Unless you've been doing video work or other motion picture, yeah, there's a whole lot different world there.
you know, it's just amazing. And then you know, you do something and go, well, that's pretty good. And then you go along and you do the next thing, and then you go back to what you did the first and went, well, that's not very good anymore because I've learned some stuff. So then you got to go back and redo what you did in the beginning. And so, yeah, eventually that's on my to-do list here, to try to get that done for him here shortly before the end of the year. But
Russ has determined that, I don't know if he's relayed this, but a series of stills on a PowerPoint generally displays better than a video on Zoom,
Yep.
if that helps.
he hadn't yet, but of course now I got a little bit of Bunza in me. So now it's the challenge to get it done right.
Have you gotten to the point where you shoot video for a half hour and edit it for 3?
Oh, yes. Oh, yeah.
Yeah, that's
and then trash the whole thing and start over.
There's a reason it generally takes a week for me to get these up online.
The first video I ever shot on my railroad, a runaround, I didn't have much equipment. I had a point and shoot camera, which I put up on edge, and it took me about 96 seconds till I came to a bridge where I didn't have clearance, and it knocked that camera right off that flat car. But I kept it. It was a great video for humility.
well, you could have documented it as the photographer fell down.
Well, I was thinking about doing a clinic, on shooting from the cab. It's been done a lot. And I didn't have much to add, but the humor there still makes me chuckle.
I have a GoPro session mount on a flat car that I use for that sort of thing. Although I saw a photo the guy posted to Facebook, and then he sent me the links. He's actually selling the STL files for a 3D printed camera car. You don't want to use the resin type printer. You want to use the FDM, I think it's called, the one where you use the long strands of plastic. But it'll hold a GoPro session, and it's adjustable up and down. So you can either do cab view or call it couple of caboose view. Hi, Stan. Good to see you again, sort of.
Ross? can
Yes.
you- This is Jon Harrison down in Portland.
Yeah, hi, John.
You've been on my way out.
Yep.
Where do you live?
Troutdale.
Okay, all right. Okay,
So if you're ever in the area, let me know.
all
He's
right.
one of those Easterners.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, we may be moving to Washington, so I'm kind of looking for people up there. So,
Oh, okay. There's a lot of them up there in the Seattle area, or?
yeah, actually Bainbridge Island, which is definitely the
okay.
Seattle area.
You'll be in the thick of it up there.
Really?
Oh yeah,
Well,
there's all kinds
don't-
of great stuff up there.
I'm sorry my wife heard that because she's the one that's really pushing for the move. But I've got a bit of a layout that I would have to take to the dumpster, which is
Deterrent.
a bit of a deterrent, needless to say. I've been working 16 years on it, so.
That's what
Not-
big U-Haul trucks are for.
This is 30 by 60, at least in the room it fills, so. Let alone trying to find a house with that big a basement up there for under about $15 million. It's a bit of a challenge.
Moving the workshop is not a problem?
Oh yeah, that's another problem, but at least I moved that once from Roseburg up to here, but the railroad would be the next thing to impossible. I think I would just start over again with a loop of track around the walls of the garage.
How far is that from Gig Harbor?
How far is that from
45 minutes.
45 minutes, Nora says?
I'm just wondering if Mike Devereaux's house is still available. He moved to Indiana. And I think he had a big outbuilding for his layout, or a big
Really?
basement.
You want to, what do you think of Big Gig Harbor, Nora? She's shaking her head. She rules.
What percent complete is your layout?
I would say overall, it's probably 80%. Parts of it are pretty much totally finished. Maybe,
See, it's done. So we can move now, right?
no, it's never done. If it's done, a life is over if it's done, for a builder anyway.
I recommend a quick conversion to the Toma way of doing things.
Yeah, I've thought about that. Right now, everything's on the table, including staying here.
Okay, I've got 1 o'clock. Welcome to the Zoom presentation of Second Division's November meet. We will not be having a meet in December because December is just too busy with everything else in the way. Expect the 3rd Saturday of January to be our next meet. Yet undecided as to whether or not it's Zoom or in person, but looking at the trends, it'll probably be Zoom again. Today we have Geoff Bunza as our first presenter on lighting, a new way of seeing things, I think is what it is more or less. I know I just mangled that title. And David Ackman, who is here from St. Louis, will be presenting on making custom decals. And then after that, Jon Harrison will have a presentation on what he's been working on his Cajon Pass layout recently. And with that, Geoff, take her away.
Okay. All right. This is about lighting. And again, most of what I do is LED lighting. So it's going to be focused on LEDs, but it's going to be a little bit different. I'm not going to talk to you about the basics. I'm going to talk to you about a lot of the side effects in using lighting and how to manipulate it. And it in a sense, it's kind of like advanced modeling with light. But there's some new things that I've added as well, and we'll talk about that too. But a lot of what I'm going to be presenting is more an enhancement to the slide. So what I cover verbally, I think, is going to be actually pretty important. I typically open with something like this, where we talk about lighting and lights, and there are lots of things to consider. And even though I usually put this up, a lot of these things I only talk about in passing. I'm going to try actually to focus a little bit more on these kinds of issues today. And mostly because, to me, lighting is not just about turning on an LED. It's how you use it. It's where you use it. It's how you manipulate the light. And over time, I'm seeing more and more that this is almost like fine detailing lighting. And it can be very useful at times. The kinds of LEDs are pretty well visible to most modelers. Most of us that have been around for a couple of thousand years have started with grain and wheat bulbs and discovered somewhere along the way LEDs. And there's quite a variety of LEDs. Here's some of the ones you might know. These are all to scale. And the thing that I usually like to point out is these guys over here in the top left. Those are also to scale relative to things like the 3mm LED, the 5mm LED. I think that this is a 12mm LED over here. Come in lots of different shapes and sizes. This one's actually called a 2.5mm LED. The background of all of these is that typically the max current you put through them is 20 milliamps. Now, you're going to be able to find LEDs today where that is no longer the standard. And most of the time it goes up to 30 milliamps, 40 milliamps, 70 milliamps. They're actually, I've seen some spec'd at 10 milliamps, but it turns out it's sort of a misnomer. The vast majority of LEDs out there, you can put 1 to 20 milliamps through, and sometimes you get light out, sometimes you don't. The interesting thing are the little guys over here, which are called surface mounted devices. They're basically flat. They're about 0.02 inches thick. And when you look at them, they actually have a numeric designation 0603 for this one, 0402. And the new one to add that I want to talk about today as well is an 0201. This means for the English metric, not metric designation, 0.06 inches by 0.03 inches. So the 0201 would mean 0.02 inches by 0.01 inches. And you might guess that that is pretty tiny. And in fact, it is. The interesting thing is that they're all pretty darn bright. And one of the reasons why they can get to be almost exactly the same brightness is if you look at this guy over here, he's got a rectangular, what do they call it, resin case to it. The LED that actually glows, actually makes light, is right there, right in the middle. It's not the whole width. It's not this circular thing on the bottom. It's that little dot. And that little dot is inside the 0201 LED in a different case. And believe it or not, there are some 0402, 0201 LEDs that are going to be as bright as some of the larger LEDs because, in fact, they've got the same structure inside that are emitting light. The 0201, 402, and 0603s are great for modeling at any scale. And I'm going to show you a couple of characteristics of these that make them even better. Just to give you some perspective, and if you have seen my other modeling with light clinics, you've seen this slide. This is not a nail. This is a straight pin pointing at an 0402 LED. Here's an 0603 LED. These are the tiniest, sharpest tweezers that I have. They're only about 2.5 inches long. And those points, if you stick yourself with them, will go right into your skin. They're as sharp as hell. So to give you perspective on the size of these things, I'm just trying to get you to understand. Here is an 0603 lit up and a larger 3528. 3528 obviously is a much larger LED. The colors are a little bit different, but what I wanted to show you was that a very tiny LED can glow very brightly and do the job just like, you know, the larger 5mm or 3mm LEDs that you might be more familiar with. Now, I want you to pay attention. This is going to be a little movie. Right at the end of this wire is an 0201 LED. And what I'm going to do when I play the video is I'm going to grab the wire at the base and I'm simply going to twist it. Now, nothing else is happening. I'm just turning the LED around about 200 degrees. So watch closely at the end of the wire. You turn it all around, and what do you notice? Even at 1 milliamp, it's pretty darn bright. I'll do it again. That's with 10 milliamps, not even the full value. Then you go down to 1 milliamp, it's incredibly bright. And the thing that I'm hoping you noticed is that when you turn it all the way around, there's no back or front. You're just looking at the LED lit up. And consequently, you can use that and stick it virtually anywhere you want to get the effect. And since it's incredibly tiny, you could use it in N scale as a step light. but you can also put it virtually anywhere you wanted in HO scale. You know, I suppose if you really were a glutton for punishment, you could put one of those behind each number of a number board, a 4-digit number board, and each number would have its own LED backlight. 12-volt strip lights are used more and more for layout level lighting, room lighting, but there's no reason why you couldn't take them. And if you were running DC, clearly you just take the wire from the rails and run it up. They actually will turn on about 6 volts. I should have said before, by the way, if anybody has a question, just ask. But these strips can be broken up into groups of 3, usually 3. And so you can cut them to length. So one of the things I tried early on was cutting them to length for passenger cars and just running them directly off of the DCC line that came into the car, and it'd be on constant brightness. The problem with that for DCC, by the way, is that they'll respond to the DCC 12 volts or higher even, but they're incredibly bright. And so you really have to cut them down even more than they're cut down. These are all made to be run at 12 volts and continuously at 12 volts. So a strip that's usually about 11 meters long might take 3 to 5 amps of current. So that's a lot of current. One of the things that I usually mention in passing, I want to spend a little bit more time on, is white LEDs. Now, if you go to a store, whether it's your local hobby store or online, they've got all these great descriptions of LEDs, you know, like warm white, sunny white, pure white, cool white. They're all garbage. They mean nothing. They're all marketing terms. Warm white might mean incredibly yellow to one vendor, and it might mean almost, you know, bright, regular, what we would call full visibility white to another vendor. It really is garbage. If they publish anything, they ought to be publishing the temperature, color temperature comes out, and almost nobody does. On the 12-volt light strips that we just saw before, very often now you'll find a couple of different measures of the color temperature and the brightness that are attributed to them as people get more and more astute and sensitive to the light going out. Nonetheless, if you grab a white LED, the neat thing about it is that you can color it. And there's enough broadband white light coming out of even the yellowish tint or the bluish tint that you can color them. And the best thing to color them, I found, is with Tamiya clear acrylic paints. You can color them with Sharpies. You can color them with, there's a tint that's used for stained glass. There's a bunch of other things that you can use. You could actually even use a very thin coat of lacquer, and that'll work too if it's thin. The top strip up here are all white LEDs, like this one here, this one here, this one here. This one is not colored or tinted. The other ones are colored with, these over here are colored with Tamiya acrylic. These two are colored with red and blue Sharpies. And notice that when they're off, and all the top ones are off, it looks like you've got a pretty even coat. When you turn them on, they're so bright, you can see all the swirls and unevenness of the coat, whereas the Tamiya acrylic coats are fairly smooth and quite nice. And if you want a deeper color, say if you wanted a deeper blue, you can put on a second coat. That, of course, will cut down on the total light coming out, but you can get a nicer color, a deeper color coming, what do they call it? More saturated color coming out. The other part of it that's neat is that you can actually mix the Tamiya acrylics, even though they're clear. They mix just like a regular acrylic paint. So you can get a wide variety of colors. And that comes out nice too. The big deal about working with these tiny LEDs is to attach wires to them. And I usually go through and show you how to do it. I'm not today, but I do want to point out that there is a kind of new insulation. There are three basic kinds of insulation on magnet wire, which you can get up to 44 gauge. And once you get to 38 gauge, that tends to be thinner than a human hair. But if you try to sandpaper it off or take it off with any kind of abrasion, the insulation on the wire, generally speaking, you're going to gouge the wire and make it more fragile. There is a brand of wire put out by the Essex Group where the coating is called Solderon, and it has the wonderful ability that if you stick the wire end into a blob of freshly melted solder, and I notice I said freshly melted, if you leave it there too long, I think it actually cools, even though it's on the end of the soldering iron, and it doesn't have the same effect. When you push it in and pull it out, you get all the insulation removed for the duration of the push and pull, and it also winds up being tinned. It's an incredibly convenient way to do it. What I wanted to add this time is that if you buy a modern solenoid or coil for any that was made relatively recently, a lot of them have insulation on them that if you unwind the coil to the solenoid, you have a layer of insulation that'll behave exactly the same way as solderon. And I'm finding this more and more as time goes on. Originally, magnet wire was coated with shellac back in the early 20th century. They went from shellac to varnish, and both of them could only be removed other than by abrasion with a chemical that was a known carcinogen, and you can't get it anymore. I used to have a tiny little bottle of it, and it gummed up so much it became useless. So now looking for magnet wire like this is great. And I'm going to show you one of the reasons why it winds up being great. When you work with small parts using sticky blue tape, masking tape is a great way to hold small parts, even brass parts that you're going to solder to or glue to, or very, very small styrene subassemblies. Sticking it to the tape is great. It doesn't leave a lot of goo on the part, and it holds it in place at least for a little while until you can glue it or solder to it. And again, in my usual clinic, what I point out is when you solder to really small devices like surface mount devices, the number one rule to keep in the back of your mind is only one thing moves at a time. So you put the LED down, and the lighted side is down against the tape here. You can take a little bit of, what is it? Not resin.
Rosin?
Yeah. Yeah, rosin, but what's the generic word? Oh, come on. Anyway, you can.
Flux.
Say again?
Flux.
Flux, yeah. You can put a little flux down here. It's liquid, and that'll help the flow. You then tin it, then take your tinned end of your wire, put it over the top, and then push the wire in to the tape. So everything is being held in place, everything is tinned. And the very last step then is to take your tinned tip of your soldering iron and just touch it, and everything flows and solders up, and it's great. So you can work with incredibly tiny parts with no microscope. It'd be nice if you had a magnifier, but I even found because all the parts are stable, you can do a lot of interesting things. And I've gotten to the point where I'll even work on small styrene parts the same way. And consequently, you can do things like thread the wires through figures like Fred to light up a little lantern. And this has gotten written up a couple of thousand times. I'm not going to focus too much on it. But that's an HO scale lantern. It is not the Utah Pacific lantern, which is about S scale. And you can, in fact, make all kinds of interesting things. I recently have seen a guy making a, what do they call it? A 3D printed part of a lantern. And it makes this lantern look incredibly toy-like. It's got every detail you could possibly imagine on a HO scale lantern. I'm waiting for him to come out with N scale. He does, I think he does HO, S, and O. And they're incredibly good. But if you're 2 feet away, this looks really, really good. And it's nice to see. And drilling the holes through them, you know, generates a nice figure. And you can pose them different ways. Here's the guy we just saw, Fred, at the back of the caboose. And here's some lighted markers on the caboose. And of course, Barney holding his lantern there. So you get some really interesting ways to go and do it. One of the things that I do want to point out, though, is that these little LEDs, even if you put 20 milliamps through them, they're not generating any heat. So you can use things like paper as a washer to hold them in place. You can glue them, in fact, to the paper. Another trick that's really neat is that you can cover the entire assembly after you've soldered to it with a clear glue like super glue, or crystal watch crystal glue, or canopy glue that some modelers use. All crystal clear, all dry clear. You can actually even cover it with a thin coat of Elmer's glue. And the reason you can is that while Elmer's glue doesn't dry crystal clear, it's pretty close. So you can actually protect the entire assembly. So if you were putting this inside a brass locomotive, say headlight housing, and you were afraid that the contacts might short, just cover them with clear glue and they're great. Absolutely work great. This is a different way of dealing with the positioning. This uses flat-nosed clips. These are electrical contact clips to actually hold things like the larger LEDs in place, together with the second one to hold the wire, to position it so that you can position the wire coming in at the right angle, in the right direction. You solder the end of it, and everything again is held in place so that the only thing that moves is your soldering iron. This is a larger LED, the 3528 one that I showed you before. And I originally used that one on headlights, and it makes an incredibly bright headlight. It would look great in an O-scale model. And what I used to do when I first started using these LEDs, I would take a model, and I think that this is a Proto 080. I drilled out the entire headlight, and I positioned the LED all the way in the back of the headlight housing. Didn't do anything except glued it in place, had the wires, in this case, they ran diagonally down the back and into the boiler. You can't find them anywhere. They just hide. And then I took and I used a paper punch to punch out the clear styrene to make the headlight front. And it's great. It works terrific, except that the LED is clearly visible when it's turned off, as it is here. And I originally was a big fan of MV lenses. And so I thought, well, what if I put an MV lens in the back of it, which you can get. And I still wanted to use the LED. Well, I switched to an 0603 LED. I drilled the back reflective material out of the MV lens using a 16th inch drill bit, which is bigger than the LED. Glued it back in place and covered it. And lo and behold, I got this wonderful reflective lens. And this is what I now use in headlights if I can find the right MV lens. They seem to be more and more difficult to find these days. But the combination is fantastic. Positioning an LED for a marker, I originally thought I was going to have to use 3 LEDs. Well, that's a waste of time in LEDs. What you wind up doing is taking an LED like an 0603, put it into the marker housing, and this is a Utah Pacific, I think, marker housing. You glue it in the back. You don't even let it stick into the hole. This is after you glued out all of the portals for the lenses. And I was figuring, well, I'm going to have to use a jewel or something and scrape off the back. No, that's a waste of time. There's two ways to handle the lenses. One is that you can fill it up with your favorite clear glue, let it dry, and then paint it with Tamiya clear acrylic to get the color you want. Or, as I found out later, if you use the Tamiya clear straight and you're very judicious with it, meaning you're very careful about how you apply it, you can actually plug all the holes entirely with the Tamiya paint and get a very nice color to boot. What you need to be careful of, you can't lay it down on the side like this. You're going to have to do it when it's vertical. Otherwise, it would tend to drip into the housing and sometimes cover another lens. So that's one of the reasons why I've stuck to using the clear glue and then applying the paint on top of it. The big deal about this is when you have that one LED, it lights up all three lenses, even though it's pointed essentially out the side. And it's great. You can see it here. That's the way these are lit up. This is red to the back and yellow to the front and side. The only other thing you got to worry about is that LED is so bright, it will light up the inside of the caboose, in this case, in an odd way. So what I wind up doing is taking a piece of plastic, or a lot of times I will use a toothpick, shove it in the back, glue it, and paint it black so that no light comes out the back. And usually I don't like the effect of that. If I want to light the caboose internally, I'll specifically light the caboose internally and not try to make double duty out of the LEDs that are in the markers. Okay. This is a little bit different, and I want to make a point because there's a lot of garbage on the web about using LEDs and how you light them. A CL2 is actually a current regulator. I'm not going to get into their use. I've covered it in a couple of articles in different places. Needless to say, if you put that CL2 in series with an LED and nothing else, and you put 5 volts across it from the far side of the CL2 regulator to the other side of the LED, it will only allow 20 milliamps to go through it, even if I change the 5 volts there to 12 volts or 20 volts. So it regulates the current, not the voltage. So each one of these, the way they're fixed up, they're all going to be connected to a 9-volt battery. Each one of these is going to have 20 milliamps going through. And what you wind up with is this. And the reason that this is incredibly bright and this is incredibly dim, by the way, that is on. And they're all red LEDs, believe it or not, is that this one was manufactured in 1996 and this one was manufactured in 2017. Over the years, LED manufacturers go way out of their way to improve the efficiency of the light coming out of the LED. So for net 20 milliamps put in, they're trying harder and harder every year to make them brighter and brighter, and they succeed. And this is the effect of their success. The reason why I'm showing this to you is that it relegates all these wonderful calculators that are on the net about calculating the resistor to put in series with your LED to basically be worthless. Because if you used an LED from way back when, in 1996, you got a surplus, and you say you put a, let's say it's a 470 ohm resistor in here to make it bright. If you try to use that with this one, it would be incredibly bright and probably pull a lot more current through. But the issue is, what you want to do is you want to control the LED's brightness depending on your taste and your application. There are modelers who can't stand bright LEDs. I love bright LEDs in headlights. And I like my markers to be as bright as I can make them because the light coming out of those little ports is not much. So depending on your taste, what you'd like, and also depending on when the LED was manufactured, the dropping resistor instead of the CL2 that you're probably going to use are going to be different depending on the batch of LEDs that you use. Okay. So they're different because they were manufactured in different years and their efficiency was different. The other thing I pointed out is using very thin enameled wire, magnet wire, to connect to your LEDs. And you can buy the LEDs with this magnet wire connected. And in fact, I do so at every opportunity because I really don't want to go through and that procedure of taping things down and connecting the wires. I'm telling you about it because if you buy magnet wire attached LEDs, a lot of them are only about 6 centimeters long. And if you happen to need one that's 10 centimeters long, then you're either going to figure out a way to extend the wires or you're going to solder your own wires to the LED. The neat thing about the very thin magnet wire, though, 36 gauge, 34 gauge, even 38 gauge, it's so thin that I used to take it and cut it to length, re-tin the ends and use it that way. I stopped doing that because I just found it to be a waste of time. What I do now is take the extended length, just coil it around, stick it against a flat spot or relatively flat spot inside the locomotive or car. I take a piece of Kapton tape, which is incredibly thin and incredibly high temperature insensitive, and just tape it against the side of the car. And the reason why I'm telling you about it is if you ran your finger over it, you can barely feel the wire and it doesn't take up any room. If you remove the Kapton tape, say the LED dies somehow or you destroyed it, you can simply remove the tape and it leaves almost no residue on anything inside the car. So it's great to use. This is something I'm trying to show you that not all LEDs are equivalent. So I'm going to run this little video and I want you to watch the set of LEDs light up. And on the left side is a red LED. I think it goes red, orange, yellow. Oh boy, eventually we're going to get to white. This is blue. I think there's a green and this might be green. So they're all different colors. They're all wired in parallel. All of their leads are connected on one side. All the leads are connected on the other side. Okay, directly. And I'm going to power them up using a very, very stable voltage supply. And I want you to watch the LEDs. Now, remember, they're all wired together. Whoop. Here we go. Okay, the red's coming on. I went over to yellow. Greens should be coming on. And the blue and the white should be coming on last. There they go. Notice they all came on at different points. As the voltage rose and now decreases, they all come on at different voltages. They don't behave the same. And this is what I'm trying to get people to realize is that when you go and do this, this is the reason why you can't use the same dropping resistor or current limiting resistor. Because while they may all be powered with, say, 10 milliamps, the voltage across them needs to be different. And it's dependent on the color of the LED. And if you don't get that, you tend to make mistakes and weird things happen. But if you know about it ahead of time, you'll make fewer mistakes. This is an example of building a flashing crossing lights out of an old Plasticville crossbucks. The thing that I wanted to talk about, though, is not kit bashing it, but how you seal the colors and why you do it. After you put the lenses in place, I take clear Kamaya red and completely paint the back of it all the way around, right? After that's painted black, I'll drill holes in it and painted red. I'll drill holes in it and I'll put the LEDs, in this case, I think they're 0402 LEDs, and I will then take and paint it again on top. That'll seal this in. And the last step is that front and back over here, these get painted black. The reason why you paint it red like this is because if you strictly just painted it black without doing that, the black paint seeps in the crack and you get these weird patterns around the lens that you look at from the front. The LEDs are so bright, it will show up any little tiny deficiencies. The reason why you paint the back of it black again is so that no light goes out the back of this. There's only light to the front. But sealing the light and thinking about where the light goes is really important. Here's a case where it's actually exactly the opposite. These are 0602, is that right? 0402 LEDs. They're actually fully exposed on the top of the gate here. And they're all being controlled, and those tiny wires are being run all the way back across the gate and then down. You could see it sticking out here and down to the bottom and away. So you can hide them in plain sight because if they're off, you can barely see them. When they're on, all the wires are hidden and they come on so bright, you're paying attention to the LEDs and nothing else. Here's a case now where I want to change the topic just slightly and talk about something just slightly different, and that's the use of different kinds of LEDs. There's an animation in here that I typically ask people to look for. And the first time I tried this in a clinic, people went crazy looking for it. I finally had to point it out what it was. And this animation is an animation of a firefly going on right here. You can see it coming on. And in fact, it's a very specific firefly that has a very specific blinking pattern that is really irrelevant right now. But what I wanted to show you was the use of a different kind of LED to create that. And the LED to create it is an ultraviolet LED. And typically you don't see the ultraviolet LED, except in one case that it becomes incredibly obvious. UV LEDs actually wind up with a small amount of blue tint. And the blue LEDs that you commonly see become white LEDs when you take the LED, the tiny little piece of LED, and you convert it to a white LED by covering it with white phosphor. And when the blue LED, which is very heavy in UV light, turns on, the white phosphor glows, and that's how you get most of the white LEDs that are produced. In this case, you have a different set of material for the LED. They're trying to steer it so that it's only putting out UV light, ultraviolet light, was a higher frequency light. And the UV light is what will make phosphorescent paint glow. Now, this is not glow in the dark paint, it's phosphorescent paint. And you can now get phosphorescent paint in acrylic, which is a relatively recent development. Used to be the only one that you could get was enamel, Tester's enamel. You can see the bottle of it here. And the way this works is you take a UV LED, and I drilled a small 1/16 of an inch hole into it, because remember, this is resin. It's kind of like acrylic. Then take a brass tube and glue it into the top of the LED so it becomes a collimator. And then you basically point it and hide it at a tiny drop of paint on a bush. And that's what creates the glow for the firefly. So it's a relatively trivial example of using a UV LED. And I didn't have much of more of a reason to use UV LEDs until I decided to take the next step and make simulated scale neon signs. Again, using a UV LED. In fact, in this case, I'm going to use 3 of them. And I simply take and I built a channel out of 3 pieces of glued plastic. I think they're about 040 thick each. Glued them together. One was more depressed than the others. Drilled from the bottom up, holes 3 millimeters, so I can put my 3 millimeter UV LEDs in the bottom. And here they're all wired together with a single dropping resistor. So they all come on together and they're going to glow 1, 2, 3 in this channel. And this channel was a prop for me to make scale neon signs and to try them out. And this over here, Eat at Joe's, is a HO scale sign for like a diner or a restaurant. And notice that they're different colors. This is supposed to be yellow. I think this is supposed to be orange. And this is obviously green. And they're all lit by LEDs from the bottom. And these are obviously UV LEDs. Now you can actually light this up from the bottom, from the top, and from the side. And the farther away you are from the LEDs, eventually the light will drop off. But it turns out with this small sign for HO scale, you can light it in virtually any direction. So the signs are actually cuts into clear plastic. Now I did this with a K&K zinc, is it K&K zinc? Paper cutter. So the kind of cutter that's XY controlled, computer controlled, and it's basically got a knife blade at the end. And these signs, the gas sign and the eat sign, were simply cut into, in this case, they were cut into 1/16 acrylic sheet. And they don't go very deep into the acrylic sheet, which is amazing. And you can see a little bit of the purplish glow on the bottom and at the edge over here. But in the middle, you see the nice effect that you can get as if it was a neon sign. And I used, in this case, I switched from the Tamiya fluorescent to acrylic fluorescence made by AK and Model Color. And they work great. And they come in a really wide variety of colors now. Instead of using the K&K machine to cut them, I tried using a scribe, just a typical scribe like this, and one of my old drawing stencils. And you can get these in different varieties and styles and shapes. And I wanted to see if I could just take a piece of plastic and using the scribe and the template, could I create one that, you know, had some viability? And the answer was yes. Now, the problem with using the template is that the point of the scribe is much narrower than the thickness of the hole in the template. These were made for drawing pencils, so they're much wider by about 8 or 10 to 1 than the tip of the scribe. So I tried to keep it at one side of the template, but I didn't succeed all the time. So this comes out a lot rougher. But again, when you're 2 feet away from the sign, it actually comes out pretty good. So since I was able to do that by hand, I wanted to see if I could create them by machine and how far could I go making detail. So I took old RCA signs and made them into a line drawing. And this, of course, is his master's voice was the old RCA logo. And I was able with this machine to create this, and this is one lit up. So the point I'm trying to make is not that this actually looks like neon, because it doesn't quite, it's way too detailed, but you can in fact make finely detailed lines in plastic. So if you wanted to make N scale or even smaller neon signs, you have the ability to do it. And it's kind of a neat thing to see. So if you're into neon signs, you have hope. The last thing I wanted to talk about was another kind of LED, which is an infrared LED. So the UV LED is very high frequency above the visual range. Infrared is below the visual range. And these are typically used for detectors. And in this case, the clear lens one is the IR LED, infrared LED. And this is the LED that's used for a detector. And using it in this case, and this is a module you could get really cheap, like for 49 cents off of eBay. This emits the infrared light. It bounces off of a car, somewhere in this vicinity. It bounces back, and the light is detected by the detector. If you want better performance, what you should do is either cover this with heat shrink tubing, cover both of them with heat shrink tubing, or at least paint them black and leave the tip of them alone, and you'll get a little bit better sensitivity. The problem with IR LEDs is that they are sensitive to incandescent light, which puts out a lot of infrared. The problem with UV LEDs, if you were to try to use them in the same way, is that they are sensitive to fluorescent light, which puts out a lot of UV light. So when you use IR LEDs and detectors or UV LEDs and detectors, you really need to pay attention to the fact that there are other things that'll interfere with the light, i.e. add light when you're hoping that the only light that's around is the ones that light that you're generating, which isn't the case. It's far better to have a set of resistors, regardless of what LEDs you're working with, so that you can try out the set of resistors as the current limiting resistor in the application you're using to control the light out, because it's easier simply to swap them and try them out than to try to guess ahead of time. And typically what you ought to do is start with a high-end range. And I, in fact, have a 10,000 ohm resistor that I actually start with now. And I go down to about a 220 ohm resistor, depending on the voltage that you're going to use to power the LED and the brightness you want out of it. And that way you get around, do I want to worry about the efficiency and anything else? I simply stop worrying about that and just try a couple and see where I wind up. The last thing I wanted to do is to talk about manipulating the light. And in this case, it's mostly talking about diffusion of the light, particularly visible light. LEDs are so bright that you can put it inside a styrene tube behind an 040 white styrene sheet, and you will get light through that, even to the point where it simply won't be diffused. It may be concentrated right at the point where the LED is. We talked before about coloring the LEDs. Here's an example of a model house that I built. And what I wanted to do is to show you how you get to the point of manipulating the light. You start by changing the color. Here you have a kind of a bluish tint LED. We add a coat of Tamiya clear orange, and all of a sudden it looks more like an incandescent light. And if you look here, you can actually see through the clear acrylic or styrene that I'm using for the window. And now if you take dull coat and simply dull coat the clear styrene, it comes out with what I call not a frosted window look, but a dirty window look. And that particularly becomes in handy when you've got lots and lots of windows, and especially if you don't want to decorate the internals of the house. I always will use a dull coat diffusion for two reasons. One is I don't have to put an interior in, but when I want an interior, I'll leave it clear, even if some of the lighting that's used in the same room goes through a window that I don't want to focus on. So up here, I dull coated these because I didn't want you to be able to see the LEDs that are actually on in the room. Down here, I have a figure that's welding, and I wanted a clear view of them. Here, I wanted a figure to come to the window, and I wanted you to see the figure clearly. This is dull coated over here. But you'll also note that when you do the dull coating, you wind up with a diffusion, much like putting it behind a piece of white styrene. And by doing that and paying attention to where you position the LED behind it, this looks like a ceiling light in the middle of the room. This looks like a light that's off in the corner. This looks like a light that's way off in the corner here. You even see the reflection down here. It's incredible what you can do. And the last thing I wanted you to pay attention to, which a lot of people don't, is not simply putting the LEDs and the lights in the room, but dealing with making the whole thing work by sequencing, turning things on and off in the right sequence. And you probably have seen, I don't know if I got this here. Yeah, I do. No, I guess I don't. Okay, so I'm going to move on. By sequencing the lights, you create the effect that something's going on. You know, whether it's the welder welding, whether it's room light going on and off, whether it's a flasher going on and off, you have the effect of some kind of activity. And it's the activity that changes the game from modeling with light to animating with light. And so by thinking about the lighting ahead of time, I'm trying to get you to and force you into a pattern of thinking about how you make all the modeling happen. And Geoff, I expect that I'm beyond my time. Is that correct? I don't hear Geoff, so I'm going to turn that on. Here's an example of sequencing the lights to create all kinds of effects. A barrier light, a blinking light that's also can be controlled manually. Building lights going on randomly in a sequence, but notice not going on and off randomly like a Christmas tree. Trying to simulate movement from room to room, somebody going into the room, doing some activity for some arbitrary period of time and then moving on. Here's the other one that I was trying to get to. So affecting the building lighting particularly for background buildings, when you have nothing else going on and just the building really makes it come alive. You can also use indirect lighting inside a room in the building to create TVs. You can put this lighting around a marquee to create chase lights, and they work like a champ, and obviously are a big draw. You can also have flashers here for the gate and the flashing signal. And notice that for the Christmas tree, it truly was random. Multiple colors for color TV. And again, you're not really making it so that you're looking directly at it. Here's one where you are looking directly at the firelight, and it actually uses a red, a yellow, and a white light. The white light is for a pop of air in the lighting. So by sequencing everything in particular, you get to control it and make it come to life far beyond just turning the light on and off. So this will be in the slide handouts. It's places for you to go and learn a little bit more and get some materials. And this particular slide set will be given to Geoff. And you can also see the URL at the bottom. I posted it on my website too. So that's about it for this time. I hope it gives you some insights into not just sticking an LED light in and hoping for the best, but using it and thinking about how it's going to be perceived in your models. Question?
All right. Do we have any questions?
Well, not a question, but if anybody wants more details, they can watch Geoff's wonderful Train Master TV series on the lighting. That was really good.
Well, thank you. Thank you. Thanks, Russ. I appreciate that.
All right. I've got it. Can you all hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Okay. I've got it about 1:53. So why don't we call about 7 or so minutes for a bio break, and be back at 2 o'clock for David's presentation. Does that work for everybody? I'm not seeing any
Okay.
notes.
I'm gonna post the link in the chat to the slide set.
Jeff,
Yo,
Sure.
Jon Harrison here. Do you have a suggested replacement for dull coat, which is, I understand, has been not produced for, I don't know, maybe a couple of years, but it's harder than heck to find.
there's actually another, the guys who took up testers actually have a substitute that's almost exactly the same, and I can't remember what it's called. But what I did hear is that if you go, what's the cans of spray paint you find at a lot of hardware stores? And even
Rust-Oleum and Krylon.
Krylon has a matte, and there's a specific name for it. If you look up Joe's acrylic painting guide, I think he mentions it in there or in the comments thereafter. But there's a matte coating that Krylon makes that a lot of people are starting to use.
It's the 1311 is the number.
Matte finish, that's it. And I've heard a lot of good things about that.
Okay, good. I read that on Model Railroad Hobbyist, and I think I got a can. Just haven't tried it. Before I hit a valuable model, I'd like to know how it's going to turn out. So
the biggest problem about Krylon cans is putting the coat on too heavy. So I would practice on a piece of cardboard before I shot a good model with it.
yeah, that was the nice part about the tester spray paints, that they were geared toward modeling. And although I have heard that Krylon has a pretty fine tip relative to Rust-Oleum and some of the others. But I don't know.
I haven't heard anybody recommend the Rust-Oleum dull coat, but
Right.
Krylon's pretty good.
Okay,
Now, there's
thanks.
supposed to be a Blick art store product that's supposed to be good too, that I've heard about, but I can't remember the name of it.
Maya also has a flat. I'm not sure how totally good it is. I've been using it some, but just as a blast across the model.
The thing of Tamiya that I like a lot is the primer. I've had good luck with Tamiya primer.
Yeah, me too. Yeah. Incidentally, they say, we're getting a little bit of an aside, they say it's good for plastics and maybe metal, but they don't even mention any. I mean, assume it's will work on wood and other things, but I don't know why.
I haven't tried it on wood. I don't see why it wouldn't.
Yeah, okay.
Okay, here's what
I will say
the
one thing.
Krylon looks like.
I actually have used the Tamiya fine surface primer on wood, because I had a couple of station kits that I had to paint in SP Colonial Yellow and using True Color or paint, and that definitely wanted to have the primer, and so I have done it on wood, and it does work just fine.
Yeah, I don't see why it wouldn't, and I don't know. I think they shot themselves in the foot by not mentioning wood. It probably lost some sales there, but anyway.
Has anybody used the Krylon clear coat on stained wood?
No.
Yeah, I haven't. That's always an issue for me.
Mm-hmm.
Putting a coat on top of stain sometimes is problematic.
I think on any stain, even on house stains, sometimes it doesn't adhere. It can be it can be problems.
Yeah.
Mr. Kaiser, hello there.
Hey there, Jeff. I had to get unmuted. I forgot that I turned the sound off.
How's life in Markham?
Life in Markham, the sun is shining.
I think it is here too.
Hmm.
Is your layout up and running?
No, not much has happened down there for the last year with a combination of COVID and a new knee and all those kind of things. Well, it's been kind of hard to get up and down the stairs.
How long ago did you get the new knee?
Just a year ago. Just about a year ago today.
Is it working out okay?
Yeah, it turned out great.
Good. My mom's had both of hers replaced by now. Does seem to do a world of good.
Well, it's certainly a lot better than what I had.
Hello, David. Are you back with sound?
Well, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
I think I set on the volume control for my microphone. Geoff, I had a question for you. Where do you find those small LEDs like the 0603?
Typically, I'll find them. Well, there's two places I like to buy them because I like to get them now pre-wired.
Yeah.
And one of them is from a place on eBay called Lead Baron, LEDBARON. And one of the reasons I like getting it from there, they're in Germany. It takes a while to ship, but it's shorter than getting it from China. A lot of times you can get various sizes down to 0402, and they're pre-wired, and you can get them in batches of 10 or 20 or 50 or 100. And as the volume goes up, the price goes down. The second thing, though, is lately, the only place I've been able to find 0201 pre-wired LEDs is from one vendor in China. And they're good. They're good quality. He only puts out, I don't know, about 20 or 30 or 40, I can't remember, at a time in groups of 10. And they're a little more expensive than Lead Baron, but they're the only pre-wired 0201s that I've been able to find. And 0201s are so tiny, it's ridiculous. I don't even want to think about soldering to them. But you can get 0402s, you can get 0603s and 0806s from, without them being pre-wired. You can get those from Mouser.com and digikey.com. And the quality is great, but the reason to mention them is that the quality is consistent. And if you buy off of eBay, I will tell you that the quality is all over the map, both in terms of the attachment of the wires, the color, the brightness. I mean, every parameter you can think of is variable. And so typically, if I find a new vendor on eBay, I'll order a small batch, wait the almost 3 weeks now it sometimes takes to get here, evaluate the color and everything else. And if he hasn't changed his eBay offering, meaning he's still selling from the same batch, then I'll order another batch if they're the right price, color, and I think the reliability is good. But the variability on LEDs out of China is all over the map. And so I actually have a friend of mine in California who will order without trial LEDs from China and pre-wired ones and things. But he anticipates that 20% of what he gets is going to be garbage. And it's still cheap, by the way. It's still low cost, even with the 20% breakage. But you have to be careful these days. It's not what it was a couple of years back.
But Mouser and DigiKey sell the pre-wired?
No, no way. No way. Now, there are some hobby stores. I think if you go to a place called Engineering, just NGINEERING, and they focus on N scale, but they sell all kinds of stuff. And they sell, they used to sell pre-wired LEDs. I don't remember if they do still. And there's one other one I've just recently found out. There's another vendor on the web that's US based, and he sells pre-wired SMD LEDs. I think he only goes down to 0603 though, in size. Oh, the one thing I should have mentioned is I only buy white LEDs because you can color them. And so you don't have to inventory red, green, and
Yep.
white and blue and whatever else. And just color them whatever you want. And that saves an awful lot when you're trying to finish a product,
Yep.
a project, and all of a sudden you figure out I don't have the right color. Right. So anyway, that's my best shot. By the way, if you wait a week, what I tell you may change.
All right. Everybody with their cameras on is back. So, David, I am going to let you introduce yourself and teach us how to make our own decal.
Well, thank you very much. Thanks for the hospitality here. I'm coming to you from St. Louis today. I'm a member of the Gateway Division, NMRA, and I teach several clinics on a lot of technology type issues. Geoff, you got me going on Arduinos about 2 years ago, and I've had a lot of fun with those. But our topic today is making some custom decals, and this is going to be kind of computer centric. So I'm going to roll a video here, because when I teach a clinic, I put it on video, and then I can run it over and over again and hopefully give a lot of information in a short amount of time. So it's kind of like drinking from a fire hose. But I do have some things that make it a little bit easier. I'm going to start sharing my screen now. And one thing I want to show you is a website. And if you write nothing else down, write this: DAACKM.GITHUB.io. And this is going to come up several times in the clinic as well. But this is my website. And if you go here, you can find all the information about the clinics that I teach. I do one on using PowerPoint as a CAD system. I do one on creating custom decals, which we're about to see. And inside it is, if you want, the complete clinic, and you can play it back at some later time if you want. Or if you're interested in some of the other topics I teach, there's always trailers, which are about 90 seconds, and I'll give you an idea about what the thing is. There'll be handouts if you go here for some of the clinics. So there is even a survey if you want to put on it. And as we're going to see for the custom decals, some plastic highway signs so that you can affix them to. And when we talk about text along a curve in PowerPoint a little bit, that's a tricky little technique. It's here just as in a capsule. So all this information is here on my website if you ever want to refresh yourself again with it. So DAACKM.GitHub.io. And with that, let's not close all of this. And let's get ready and let's run custom decals. At the end, we'll take some questions and go from there. So here we go. Welcome to this clinic on creating custom decals for model railroading. In the next 45 minutes, you will learn how to transform your model railroad into a more distinctive and memorable creation, like no other on the planet, by creating custom decals. This clinic is going to cover 3 main topics: how to print custom decals, how to design them, and techniques for mounting them on support structures. There will be a bit on how they are applied, and we will show dozens of samples. We will not be presenting anything on custom dry transfers, as that does not appear to be a process readily available to the home or club modeler. While some of the processes are applicable to images printed on copy paper or cardstock, this too will not be covered in any detail in this clinic. So, what is a custom decal? For the purposes of this clinic, I define a custom decal as a unique image, not otherwise available commercially, applied to a vehicle or structure of a model railroad by a wet transfer method. We benefit from custom decals because they help define the time and place of our layout and let us mark things like trucks, buildings, and signs in ways that reflect the identity of things as they are today, or reflect the way they were in bygone memories, and do so even if we cannot find such signage from any model shop or catalog. Why decals anyway? Can't we just print on paper or cardstock and keep things simple? Well, for one thing, decals are thinner. Textures like roofing, bricks, and siding pass right through without sanding. They are self-adhesive and rarely curl off around the edges. I think they are more vibrant than printing on paper. There are probably places for both, but in this clinic, we will be focusing on decals. It doesn't take much to make a custom decal. Really, it's just an inkjet printer, special decal paper, a spray can of automotive lacquer, and some design software. Yes, decals can be printed on laser printers, but the color on my inkjet is much more vibrant than that available on my laser printer. So I'm going to limit my comments to inkjet printers. I bought my Canon MG2520 inkjet printer back around 2017. I purchased it not because I wanted an inkjet printer, but because my scanner died and I wanted a new scanner, and it was more economical to buy a combination device than a separate scanner. It took less desk space too. You may already have a color inkjet printer, and if you are satisfied with the quality of your prints, it will probably suffice for printing decals. But if not, an entry-level inkjet printer from Amazon, Micro Center, or an office supply store can be purchased today for under $125. Decal paper is available from Amazon and often at hobby shops and online train stores under the Testers brand. I buy mine from Amazon from a manufacturer named Rolurius, 20 pages for $16.99, because it is much less expensive than from Testers and I prefer the quality. But now is the time to make your first decision. I'm sure you have applied decals to models before, and you remember that decals come in 3 layers: the image itself, the thin carrier film on which the image is printed, and the paper to which the film is attached, which we separate in a water bath while applying the decal. Well, decal paper comes in 2 forms, white and clear. To be more specific, when we talk about white decal paper, we really mean the film on which the decal will ride is white. It's the same for clear decal paper. It's the film that is clear. While we do not care about the color of the underlying paper, we do need to care about the color of the carrier film, because it comes in white and clear, and we need to decide which to buy. The controlling factor is whether you want the color of the underlying surface on which the decal will be placed to show through the decal. Think about the decals on a piece of rolling stock. If you want the car color to show through, you need paper with clear decal film. But if you're thinking about adding a poster to the side of a building and you do not want the wall color to bleed through, then decal paper with white film should be your choice. If you intend to affix your decal on a white background, it doesn't matter which you use. Yes, there are professional printers that can print decals in white on clear film, but they are not readily accessible to the home market. You may have heard them referred to as Alps printers, and when available in the used market, they are several thousands of dollars and are not the subject of our clinic today. I am guessing that custom decaling rolling stock is not your primary reason for watching today. Your railroad probably uses its own distinctive typeface, which you already can get from Microscale or other sources. If that is the case, then forget about the clear film for now and buy the white decal paper. I promise we will come back for samples of using clear decal paper later. The last thing you need to purchase is spray lacquer, which I get from an automotive paint store in my hometown. Other non-automotive spray lacquer may work as well, but what I use is custom blended by a store I trust, so I use it. You need lacquer to coat the decal after it has dried, because inkjet printers use water-soluble ink, and if left unprotected, the ink will dissolve when submerged in a water bath. This says clear acrylic, and when I went to my auto paint store to buy this, I asked for spray lacquer. Well, spray lacquer isn't too common anymore because of the bad environmental effects. But this clear acrylic, which I thought he blended at his own shop, but it's available nationwide. That's what I use now to prevent the decals from dissolving in the water bath. You got to protect that. And so this should be available nationwide, but it's an acrylic, not a lacquer. To keep this from happening, we spray it with 2 or more coats of lacquer and then let it dry overnight. Oh, 2 other things. Get some microsol and microset for microscale, less than $5 each in the blue and red bottles, respectively. I know you are dying to see the process, so here is the overview. Here I am in PowerPoint with the decal for the side of a box truck. Don't worry about how I drew the image or why I use PowerPoint. That will come later. First, I measured the side of my truck to see how much space I had to work with. After that, I drew a box, altered the background color to match my truck, and sized it to match the available space. I added text, then made it curve to a line. I added some clip art and printed the image on a piece of paper, held it up next to the truck, and I liked what I saw. We will cover all this in more detail shortly. I placed the decal film in the printer. My printer sprays its ink on the upper side, and I bet yours does too. So I followed the instructions, inserted the paper glossy side up, and then printed the page. Don't touch the image, as the ink is still wet and will smudge if you do. I then set it aside to dry overnight. 4 hours will generally work, and some folks say 30 minutes is long enough to dry, but why push it? If you wish, you can grab an unprinted edge and cut the printed portion from the rest of the sheet with scissors. The unused portion may be reused to print additional decals at a later time. Never use less than a half page in your printer, as it may jam and harm the printer. Don't ask me how I learned this. An evening has passed, and I am now in my shop spraying the decal with lacquer, about 6 to 8 inches from the surface and in light coats. Start outside the decal and go past the decal before stopping the spray. Then wait. What I sometimes do is put a loop of masking tape in the back so that when I spray this very small, very light object, it doesn't blow away. So just kind of tape the backside to your surface before you paint it. Yes, it's about as interesting as watching paint dry, but dry it must. You can come back in 90 minutes and give it another coat, but then let it dry overnight. Your patience will be rewarded. Keeping the application details brief, know that before applying any decal, you need to make sure the surface is glossy, so give it a spray. I am not an airbrush kind of guy, so I use an aerosol can. Give the surface time to dry, like overnight. Another day has dawned, and we are ready to apply the decal. There are a lot of videos on the topic, and I am going to take some shortcuts here. Since this is an NMRA clinic, I am assuming that you are an NMRA member and have access to the great clinics from NMRA.org. Just click on the Education tab, then on NMRA Videos, enter your identification credentials, and click on the Login button. A search screen will appear and enter Applying Water Slide Decals, and click on the search button. A clinic by Trevor Marshall and Pierre Oliver will appear, so open the clinic and pay attention. When the glossy surface is dry, we are ready to apply the decal. Cut it from the sheet as close as possible to the artwork. I use a pair of $3 decal scissors from the hobby shop, and I like them a lot. But if you are a sharp hobby knife, cutting mat, and ruler kind of guy or gal, by all means feel free to cut out the decal that way. I prepare the now glossy object surface with some brush applied microset from Microscale. the blue bottle on which I have marked the number 1 because I can never remember whether the blue or the red bottle goes on first. Then I drop the decal into a bath of room temperature water. I leave the decal in the water for about 1 to 2 seconds, pull it out of the bath, and then wait 25 to 50 seconds before attempting to place the decal. Larger decals take longer time. Then I place the decal. Use tweezers if you like, but since many of these decals are large, I often just use my fingers. I move the decal around with a dental pick until I like the placement. I then let it dry overnight. Yes, again, overnight. The next day, if you see a bit of air under the decal, something folks call silvering, try pricking the air pockets with a pin or other sharp object, then applying a bit of microsol, the red bottle on which I have marked a number 2, which will soften the decal and let it snuggle down into place. Don't try to move the decal at this stage or be upset when the decal begins to crinkle. Then set it aside. I don't use microsol on every decal, as it tends to damage my custom decals, something I have not heard reported on commercial decals. If the decal was placed on sheet styrene or a well-sanded surface, you may be able to forget this step. So use your eyes and common sense. When the drying time has elapsed, if you want to get rid of the glossy effect, just give it a spray of dull coat or some other surface coating. That's the part most people have seen before, but the fun is just beginning. Now we are going to use computer software to design our own custom decals. I am going to start by using PowerPoint 2010 because it is what I have and know. If you have another drawing package, such as LibreOffice Impress, I bet there are similar features, but PowerPoint is what I am using for this clinic. Let's start with the absolutely easiest custom decal, a depot sign. In PowerPoint, I click on the Insert tab and then on Text Box. I position my cursor somewhere on the page and then click the left mouse button to start drawing a text box. Then drag the mouse to the opposite corner and release the mouse button, and we have drawn a box. We then enter the name of the depot from the keyboard. In my case, the name is Baden. I would like a border around the depot name, so I right-click on the line which defines the edge of the box and then on Format Shape. I click on Line Color and then on Solid Line and then make sure the color matches my need and close the box. I generally like Arial type, 14 point, and PowerPoint's default is something else. So I highlight the text and make the necessary changes. You could change the color of the text as well. But I bet the box is either too large or too small. So I click on a corner and drag it to a size I like. Once I get all my colors to my liking, I set the background color of the text box to no color and print it on clear decal paper, so the background color will pass through perfectly. Or if I am going to print on a different background color than the underlying structure, I will usually print on white decal paper. For the depot, since the sign will be probably placed on white styrene, either decal paper will probably work. That's it. You have made a depot sign and can print it on decal paper and, well, you know the rest. I want to place the decal on a flat piece of styrene before mounting it to the roof of my depot. Evergreen models, part number 119, 129, or 139 styrene strips should work well for anything 14 point or smaller. But if you want something larger, you can always cut a backer board out of sheet styrene. I always paint the edges of any sign affixed to styrene. It just makes it pop a bit more. Beyond a depot sign, There is not much more to making a city limits sign. Just take a piece of evergreen 8404 for a post and glue it to the back of a depot sign, and you have a city limits sign. Drill a number 40 hole in your layout, plant it, and glue it in place. If you want to include population or elevation, just make these details smaller than the city name and center justify everything. You will probably need to cut the backer board from sheet styrene, as I don't believe evergreen makes any strips wider than a 1/4 inch. Now let's make a nameplate for a barn. My grandfather had Breezy Lane Farm on the side of his barn, with a red background and white letters. No problem. We treat it as if we were creating a depot sign and enter the name of the farm. Next, we right-click on the border and again select Format Shape. This time we select Fill, Solid Fill, and then click on a red color. We then highlight the text, right-click on it, select Font, and change the type color to white and adjust the type size and face if desired. Finally, we resize the box to meet our needs. But I wanted a white outline around the name. I again selected the shape and then again on Format Shape. This time I made the line color solid and white and thickened the style to 2 points. Because the page is white, I can't see my border line, but it is there. Trust me. Now I am going to add another shape, a slightly larger rectangle filled in red, and overlay it on the name of the farm. With this larger rectangle still selected, I click on Arrange and Send to Back. I select both boxes and center justify everything. After we place it on a piece of white styrene and trim it, we are ready to place the sign on the barn. This technique of adding a specifically colored background where we would like the white lettering to show through will prove useful later on, like when lettering rolling stock. Let's go back to the ice cream truck and cover a few more details. I wanted the text to curve, and we can do that in PowerPoint, but it is not too intuitive, so listen up. If you miss a portion, there is a link to a detailed description of the technique on my website, http://daackm.github.io. It all starts with clicking on the Insert tab, then on Shapes, then on the curly line icon, the one that looks like a sine wave, not a backwards S. I move the mouse to some open area on the page and left-click. Then I move it to another place and click again. I do this a third time because a curly line must have at least 3 points. When I am done adding points, I double-click. Now I right-click on the shape and then on Edit Points. I can click on a point to move it around, add more points, delete points, and so on. I can click on a point to select it and then click on the white boxes to change its slope. For the ice cream truck, I kept things simple and drew a simple upward pointing parabola. Now we need to add text. I right-click on the curve and click on Edit Text. I enter the text I desire, but I am always dismayed that the text color is white and I am probably on a white background, so I can't see it. No matter. I just highlight the text area and right-click. I select the font menu item and change the color, size, typeface, or whatever I want. I can see the type now, and it is linked to the curve, but it still is not curved. To get the text to curve, I click on the curve and then on the word Format under Drawing Tools. Next, on Text Effects. If your PowerPoint window is too narrow, you may not see text effects, so make the window as wide as possible and text effects will appear. I click on Text Effects, then Transform, and finally on Follow Path. I choose a path like a hill and the text curves. To get rid of the curved line, I click on the curve, then on Format Shape, then line color, and finally on no line, and close the panel. If the curve is too extreme, just click on one of the side boxes to alter the overall shape. Yes, it's complicated, but it works, so give it a try. But what about the ice cream images? Well, the internet is full of clip art and images, so I just asked Yahoo to find me clip art, ice cream. The first part of the page was text intensive, but I scrolled down and there I saw a bunch of clip art images. I found one of an ice cream sundae and clicked on it to view an image enlargement. I liked what I saw. I generally do like the clip art images from ClipArtix. So I right-clicked on it and saw options to copy the image or save it to a file. Either one would work, but I decided to copy the image, returned to PowerPoint, and pasted the image into my work area. It was way too big, so I just clicked on a corner point of the image and reduced its size until I was satisfied, and then moved it to where I wanted it. I repeated the operation for an ice cream cone and a popsicle. I used the rotation point to rotate the image and grouped everything into a single object. I was ready for printing. The sign for St. Paul's Bazaar is similar. I drew a curved line, this time pointing down, and added the text. Each line is in a different color, and the bottom two lines are smaller. Once I had what I liked, I changed the line color to no line. To get a shape outline, I selected a curved shape, sized it, and grouped everything. How about some traffic signs? To get the traffic signs, I just drew a square shape, right-clicked on it, used the Format Shape and Size to make sure it was square. You should uncheck Lock Aspect Ratio when altering just one dimension of an image, then recheck it when you have a perfect square or circle. Then I just altered the background color and line thicknesses as desired. For the railroad crossing, I had to add the black X and RR as separate items, size them as desired, and then group them together. Now, onto a highway marker, and I wanted a Route 66 sign. I started by searching the internet for an image of a sign I liked, and when I found one, I copied it and placed it into PowerPoint and decided to outline it. I just started by adding a free-form shape and kept adding and moving points until I got a half shield. When I liked what I saw, I copied it and reflected it, making sure I had the top of the two sides aligned. I added the horizontal line and the topography, appropriately centered and sized, then grouped the whole thing. It was a bit of work, but took less than an hour. A link to this and all of the images I describe here is on my handout. But clip art isn't the only thing we can download from the internet. Photos are useful, especially for billboards. Again, using Yahoo's search engine, I looked for knee-high billboard images and found one I liked. So I copied it to the clipboard and pasted it into PowerPoint. But the image needed cropping. I clicked on the image, and on the right side of the ribbon is an icon labeled Crop. When I click on Crop, handles appear, which I can use to home into the area that interests me. When I have selected the part of the image I want, I just click away from the image, the unwanted portion disappears, and the remainder can be resized as desired. You can do a lot with rectangular photos from the internet, but sometimes, like in the case of the photo of Don Knotts, there is a background that I want eliminated. Yes, PowerPoint does have a feature to remove the background from an image, but I have not been too successful with it to date. In these cases, I use Photoshop Elements. Once an image is opened, I use the Magic Wand tool to select an area of interest and then click on the Erase button from the keyboard to erase that portion of the background. Sometimes I alter the tolerance to select more or less of the image. And sometimes I have to select and delete multiple times to get all of the background erased. Sometimes I use the Select All function and then the eraser to remove the last few artifacts. Sometimes I erase too much and have to use the Edit Undo function to back up a step. When I get the image just the way I want it, I copy it and paste it into PowerPoint. With the background color eliminated from the photo, I can place the decal on a non-white surface and don't have to be super careful in cutting out the decal when using clear decal film. I like to put decals of product photos on billboard supports, and how to do that is the subject of my billboards clinic. Suffice it to say that you can cut out an appropriately sized piece of styrene for a backer board, add a frame, apply the decal to the workpiece, add legs, back strut, and a boardwalk, and glue it all together. If that sounds intimidating, there are 3D models of billboard legs and a boardwalk under my DAA-CKM moniker on Thingiverse, so give them a try. They're all HO scale, but I have sizes for billboard images ranging in height from 8 to 16 feet. Sometimes I place the decals on the sides of buildings to show the business of the primary occupant, or as a bill publicizing the feature film of the town theater. I was surprised by the opacity of white decal paper. This image shows the same decal. On the left, the decal was placed directly on a red brick surface, and the one on the right was placed on bricks painted white. There is some difference, but not as much as I expected. I used the background removal technique in creating signs for Merrimack Caverns, and as you will see later, on a sign for a Holiday Inn. Pixel editing, as it is called, can be a lot of work, but also can be highly rewarding if you get an image you really want. This scene is probably the one I have the most extensive use of custom decals. I modified a 3D structure of a model of a diner I found on Thingiverse. I removed some of the upper detail work and boarded up the windows of Bubba Joe's shop for beer, brats, bait, and bullets, after a store in a neighboring county. Most of these used clear decal paper. The beer caps are on 3D printed backers to get better adhesion to the fence, but the one for Miller is placed directly without any backer. I drew the background for the shop name using the edit points trick. Yeah, it's kind of cheesy, but everyone needs something on the wrong side of the tracks. Perhaps it could use some weathering, but I'll leave weathering to those who enjoy it more than I do. I have one last piece of software to show you, and this is for generating graffiti. I know that graffiti is not everybody's thing, but visit http://www.graffwriter, graffwriter.com and click on the Create Graffiti button. Just down and to the left of this button is a box with the word Sample in it. Click in this box and replace the word Sample with your name or other text. Leave the text size at 100 for now and select the text color and click on the Submit button. The website will generate some graffiti for you. Play around with the effects, the presets, and the fonts. Play with the colors and fades. When you have something you like, just right-click on the drawing and copy it to the clipboard. I like to set the background top and bottom gradients to transparent so that I can just copy the image to PowerPoint and size it more flexibly there. Or you could paste the image into Photoshop and have a lot of fun with blurring the edges and other advanced effects. If you use an Android cell phone, there is an app called Graffiti Creator, which looks interesting. It has bubble letters, which GraphWriter is lacking. But to get the images to PowerPoint may require doing a screen capture from your cell phone and then emailing the images to your PC. I hate my cell phone, but Ron Marsh of Ron's Trains and Things has made it work, so you might want to take a look at it. I did make a decal for the side of a boxcar on the Baden Vogt in De Smet. I started with a decorated commercial model, removed the old railroad-specific markings, and replaced them with those of the BVD. I wanted both white lettering and transparent film, and I attempted to get the effect by using white decal paper and putting white lettering on a brown background. Unfortunately, white coloring appeared around the edges. I tried to paint the edges, but I was not pleased with the results. Perhaps preparing decals for rolling stock is beyond the scope of our home-based techniques. We have placed decals on structures, vehicles, billboards, and rolling stock, and even have made our own freestanding signs. But that's just the beginning. I have some other support structures on Thingiverse that can be downloaded and printed on a 3D printer, then decaled. Things like a hanging for sale sign for the front yard, an entry banner for a county fair, a sandwich board, and several more. These are sized for the sample decals, which are available from my website at http://daackam.github.io. Many of these supports I designed using PowerPoint as a 2.5D computer-aided design package, which I hope to be the subject of a new model railroading clinic in the early summer. Until then, feel free to use these designs as you see fit. 3D printed signs tend to be a bit toothy, so give them a few extra coats of gloss before applying your decals. This is my largest decal to date. It measures 4 1/4 by 3 1/4 inches, almost 3 stories tall in HO. It started with a scanned image, and using Adobe Photoshop Elements, I eliminated all the background objects. I did not attempt to decal the star at the top, as I judged it to be too delicate. The support structure is decaled on both sides, which I achieved by copying the Holiday Inn script to a separate file, copying and reversing the entire image, using Photoshop to paint out the text, and finally pasting the Holiday Inn script back into the reversed image. The support structure uses the 2.5D trick discussed earlier. The tower at the top and the bushes at the bottom were the most fragile, so when applying the decal, I started at the curved corner and worked my way out to give the fragile parts the most support for the longest possible time. I don't have any structure which can use a sign this large, but it was a fun challenge. This is probably my most difficult decal to date. What made it difficult was not the background shapes, but the topography. It was like nothing I had available to me. I ended up scanning the image I had of the sign, and using Photoshop Elements, I placed the scan in an underlying layer. I then zoomed into the image, traced the outline of the letters of the hotel name, and created bitmaps that matched the type. Not an easy task, but the final result was worth it. I made decals for both sides of the sign. In the future, I need to look around for some good tracing software because I know the same problem will reoccur. Inkscape looks promising. Finally, on the lunatic fringe is something I hope to make someday. I wanted to create a decal as a mask for a flashing sign. I bought an experimenter's kit for electroluminescent signs from Miller Engineering at http://www.microstru.com and found the logo for the old Cat's discount drugstore chain that preceded the Walgreens and CVS stores of today. I made a decal of the old cat figure, but left the interior lines white, then printed it on clear decal film so that whatever was underneath
the electronic sign, would show through. I created a 2.5D support structure. But now I can't find the electroluminescent panel which would go between the support structure and the mask. Perhaps this will be a topic for another clinic, masking decals. I know the kit is in my basement somewhere.
I did eventually find that electroluminescent kit and put the whole thing together. I was surprised at how bright the electroluminescent was. And yes, it did show through the white areas of the decal, the clear areas, but it almost washed out the decal itself. So I'd have to tone that down before it'd be something that I found useful in the future.
We are just about out of time. But before Q&A, I want to show you a gallery of other decals I have printed. The gas station needed the company name, so a custom decal was needed. If you look closely, you can see a Texaco clock on the back wall of the office. The engines, transmissions, lubrication was another one, as was the Texaco star above the building. The support structure for the star was 3D printed using Tinkercad design software. I probably should put icons for men and women on the restroom doors. The name of the diner is a custom decal. So is the sandwich board. The sandwich board is built from a pair of flat styrene rectangles with a 30-degree wedge between them. I first tried to 3D print the sandwich board, but the result was not smooth enough for good decal application. I also made a sandwich board with a different decal for the sidewalk in front of a grocery store. Who would have thought you could buy brains for 25 cents, even on a sandwich? How about placing hopscotch layouts on a sidewalk? Here is one of the Sunbeam Bakery. The model is a flour mill from Thingiverse, but the sign support is a 3D model of mine. I printed a business card holder and then decaled it with the name of my railroad. Perhaps someone you know is running for office and needs a campaign billboard. Would your grandkids like signs to Grandma's house for their Thomas trains? Future projects could include decals for the names and construction dates for brick buildings, as well as hat pins and jewelry customized with railroad logos. Well, that's all we have time for today. Of all the clinics I have developed so far, this one probably has the potential for the most bang for your buck. I hope you give custom decals a try. Thanks for listening. And there we go, folks. How are we doing on questions?
Dave, I was asking you to simply type your website into the chat.
Well, let's do that. There we go.
Thank you.
Geoff is shared.
Anybody else? Yeah, Philip.
Yeah, in the last clinic, we talked about using that Krylon 1311 matte spray. Do you think that would also work to protect decal film? I've done that to some extent, but it seems to be pretty delicate. And if you put it on too thick, it'll cloud the decal.
Yeah, I have not tried it, but I wrote down the number because I'd like to give it a shot. Yeah, that's what I've got so far.
All right, thanks.
Anybody else? Well, thank you for your attention on this. Geoff, I have one request. I'm working on my volunteer AP certificate, and if you would send me an email indicating that this clinic did indeed take place, then I'll have my documentation, and you'll be point 42 of the 60 that I need to get that clinic. And I'm taking the next 6 weeks off, but I got about 8 more clinics scheduled after the first of the year. If any of my other clinics look of interest to you, let me know, and I'll be available come January after the holidays. Last chance, any questions?
This is good. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thanks, Dave.
We'll get that email right off to you. And Ross, let's start promoting clinics as a volunteer effort, shall we?
Well, that's an excellent point, and with it all counts. So a little bit at a time, and pretty soon you've got that volunteer certificate.
And Greg, I know you've got a couple of under your belt now. I don't know if you've got the volunteer certificate yet.
I have 0 certificates, so I need to work on that.
Ross,
yes,
you
we're gonna
need to
work on
visit
that.
Greg.
Oh yeah. He's got enough. Greg, you got enough stuff in MRH, and you probably already got your author.
Yeah, probably. I probably have volunteered pretty close too. Just never got the paperwork done. So
If you
doesn't
stack
count.
all,
With all that fantastic stuff you put out there all the time, you bet.
stack all of his mini scenes together, and you might have a golden spike.
There you go.
I think it was, yeah, probably.
All right. So now that you can all hear me, Jon Harrison has an update on his Cajon Pass layout that he'd like to show us. So Jon, the show is yours.
Can everybody hear me?
Yep.
Yep.
Loud and clear.
Okay, some of you may have seen my layout in the 2015 NMRA National or on a few tours that I had, and know that the bulk of it is a model pretty much nearly uncompressed of Summit, which is the highest point and to me the most interesting point on Cajon Pass, which is the Santa Fe Union Pacific shared trackage over out of Los Angeles to points east. The other part of my layout, and if you were visited my home, was represents an area a few miles downhill from Summit and known as Alray and Gish. There are parallel tracks, one heading uphill and one heading downhill. And at the time, a few years ago, that was nothing but bench work and the main lines in. So since then, I've been working on that area, track and scenery, and it's goes very slow because it's very complicated, a lot of mountains. And I thought I'd just give you a brief look at what I've done up to today. This is an overview looking uphill toward the tunnel, which you just barely see where that left-hand track goes into the mountain. And there's about half of the whole3 is behind us. The whole setup is about 5 feet wide, 3 to 4 feet wide, and about almost 30 feet long. So, couple of things that show up here is the, let's see, I can't point.
I think they can see that.
Can you sit? Does the square move around so I can point?
Yep.
Okay. This is the part of the mountain that goes up. And all my scenery is hard shell, which is basically a material, any sort of thin material, paper towels. I tend to use cheesecloth. That's supported by anything you can imagine to get a shape, and then hydrocal, which is a very extremely strong plaster type material, goes on and plaster over top of that. This sort of started back in the 60s with Lynn Westcott, and has faded out somewhat in recent years, but I like it. All these hills, along with all of my scenery at Summit, were taken directly from contours of from a USGS contour map and scaled down so that I had the exact shape of everything. This area in Alra and Gish is more compressed scale-wise than it was at Summit. So I had to do some modification there, and that's one reason it took so long to do what I could eliminate and what I could show. An interesting little feature up here to me, anyway, this thing right here is all that remains of a house, section gang's house that burned down in 1936. But the foundation and this chimney remained. This is just a stand-in placeholder, and I'm gonna put that foundation in accurately in the near future. So anyway, that's just kind of an overview. And this road here, a lot of it's blacked out because I have the road covered for scenery purposes, but this is Route 66 going under the tracks, and it's just started. This is a bridge of the uphill track at Alray with Route 66 going underneath it. I'll just briefly go through because my wife is telling me I'm running short on time. This is the tunnel. They call that tunnel number 2. It's, for some strange reason, it's the first one that you go through on the track heading uphill. And then there's another one, short tunnel, after that. See, what did I not show here? There's another view. This is looking back a little bit. This around here is the start of the Alray siding, so that from here to here is about 25 or 30 feet. This is one of my tighter curves. It's a 48-inch radius. The rest of them are 60-inch and larger, which is still quite compressed relative to the full scale. Let me just click through a couple more. This shows a little bit of the lower part with the upper part way up here, and shows the rather strange looking downhill track, which is 3%. The uphill track is 2.2%. This is the area referred to as Gish. The compression, which I hated to do, but was forced to, these tracks should be separated by much more, but my scenery will tend to separate them, make them look a little better when done. But what I really wanted to show is something that I just did for the first time this morning and took these pictures. The hard part of my scenery construction with the using sawdust over the contours is containing all the sawdust, removing it, and so forth. So for this section here, which is a continuation of the mountain down, it's kind of a complicated series of images that I got actually from Google Earth. And what I did is just simply took a pile of sawdust. I think this represents about 7 gallons of sawdust, and just laid them on the surface. And my intent is that I'm going to put hard shell over this and basically create a cast the whole hill in the first stage, just not all finished plaster, but just the hard shell, and then simply lift it off, set it on some sawhorses to the side, should weigh about 5 pounds or so. Take all this sawdust off and put it back down. That is going to greatly simplify everything. And what you see here is about half an hour of work of just trying to make my hills look roughly like what I see in the various photographs and so forth I have. This has not been a side.
Okay, we haven't lost John's screen, but we did apparently lose his audio.
And he's frozen.
And he's black on the screen I have. And I think he just logged out. Does anybody know if he's using that as loose sawdust or what?
Yeah, that was going to be my question. Wetting it down, or is it just loose? And where do you get that much sawdust?
That looked like finished scenery to me, and the texture's great.
I was like, how do I incorporate this in without finding 20 pounds of sawdust laying around and moving it? So
The thing that you have to know about John's layout is that Jon is trying to model Cajon Pass and the surround precisely like the topographic maps, as opposed to most modelers who, a hill is a hill is a hill. And Jon also has an extensive machine shop. My suspicion is he generated all that sawdust himself. And this is his technique for creating the exact topography. He's going to lay on top of it I'm guessing now, a hard shell, form the hard shell on top of that, take the entire hard shell off, and then remove the sawdust to be reused to make the next mound or next hill. But he has the capability both to generate the sawdust and to sculpt the hills precisely. And that's what he's been after all along, is how does he go and make that?
yeah, how large is his layout? I mean, that looks pretty sizable if he's doing summit almost to scale, 80%.
Yeah, he said before, I think it's about
30 to 60, 30 by 60.
It's about like that. Yeah.
That's the number I heard. Yes.
The Cajon Pass is like, it's like 30 by 15. And then the rest of it snakes around and down. I'm not sure exactly where in his area, the picture he showed he's modeling. But there's a lot of track, and the curves are as graceful as anything I've ever seen.
Well, yeah, what he's saying is the small one at 48 inches, I'm going, man, I'd run into a wall if I did a 48-inch curve. That'd be that's all I'd have in my room, just one big curve. That'd be it.
The amazing thing to me, and I've never seen this on anybody else's layout, you go into John's layout and he took me first to summit at Cajon Pass. And on the wall, he's got a topographic map and then vintage pictures from the World War II era of Cajon Summit. You look at the topographic map and you look at his layout, and you can pinpoint every structure, every curve, every elevation. You look at the map, you look at his layout, you look at the map, you look at his layout. It's that authentic.
Yeah. The only one I've ever seen done like that is the club down there in La Mesa in Balboa Park, where they're using topo maps. And they've got guys using lasers and all sorts of stuff to get all the hills right. And But yeah, that's a huge club that's doing that, not an individual. So
Yeah. I mean, it's a different kind of modeling. And the other thing is, if you look at his desert scenery, I mean, I lived in the desert for a little over 2 years. He nailed it. You go there and you look at his desert scenery and you think you're in the desert.
yeah, his colors and his textures. I don't know how he's doing it, but he's got that look to it. I live down in very, very Southern California, and it was that there's a lot of greenery, but it's this weird kind of scrub brush and twigs and whatnot. And most people don't put enough stuff in there. They usually just try to put, sand or dirt. And it's like, well, there's a lot of little things that you need to model. And I think whatever he's doing, he's got it figured out. Looks like a mix of paint and something else.
The other thing of note on his layout is that Cajon Pass had spring switches, and he has operating spring switches, except they don't use springs. It's all done with electronics, and they all work, and they're all great, right?
That's impressive.
And it's really slick. I mean, it's quite impressive to see. It's these little things that crop up and creep up on you, and you keep turning around, and there's one thing after another, and it's like, I've never seen this before. I've never seen this before. Pretty impressive.
It'd be hard to jump.
World War II era or just post-war or
World War II era, if I remember right. I don't remember if it's in the war or 46 or something. He actually has a specific band of dates for the era that he models, because all the buildings are from a specific date.
Yeah.
It'd be a shame to junk that kind of meticulous modeling.
If you have access to our Second Division Facebook page, there's a short video of John's one of his trains running by under the video section. It is amazing to see in person.
I'll have to jump on there and take a look at that.
Yeah, I've seen him actually use were they 210 or 210-2 helpers on the end of a long freight, and it's a long freight.
I worked at Eugene Toy and Hobby, and somebody brought one of those brass 210-0s or 210-2s in, and they just look silly. And we're like, what type of radius would this go around? It's like, oh, well, 48-inch radius is what it needs, minimum. Straight
radius.
Yeah. It goes forward and backwards as long as you want. Just doesn't make a turn.
I was hoping he'd be popping back in by now. Anybody else have anything they wanted to present? Seeing a lot of head shaking. It's after 3 o'clock now. So, Geoff, thank you for your clinic. Ross, Bill, I'm hoping to see videos or PowerPoints of your layouts sometime soon. Yep. Anybody else out there who has a layout that they would like to present for one of these, we'd be really welcome you to it. If that made any sense whatsoever.
I just decided I was going to work on a knee-high decal, knee-high sock. I'm going to work on a knee-high drink decal right now. I got my paper right here, and we're going to work on it.
Yeah, I think we need a combined effort between Geoff and Dave there to get that neon sign working with the decals and the lighting and the animation. I want to see that.
Yeah, so you can get that cat sign to work.
Yeah.
By the way, I can't remember if I added the detail that when you gouge the transparent plastic, you fill it in with the fluorescent paint and then wipe it off, so that it only remains in the area where you scribed or where you cut. I hope that was obvious, but I don't remember saying it. So
the lettering looked like it was pretty much outline lettering instead of solid. Was that an artifact of the photo, or is that actually how it looks?
For which one?
Edith Joe's.
No, Edith Joe's was a single line. I simply repeated it a couple of times. Edith Joe's was one of the first ones I made. I repeated it a couple of times because I thought I needed depth to fill it in with more fluorescent paint to make it brighter. But it turns out you don't. The fluorescent paint actually fluoresces quite brightly under the UV light. So you don't need as much nearly as I thought. And anyway, what you're trying to do, remember, is you're trying to simulate the single tube of fluorescent lighting that glows, which it actually does better than I actually thought it ever would.
So do you have a preferred source for UV LEDs?
I gave it in my blog, but you can get it from almost anywhere. There's a place called Surplus Gizmos in this area out in Hillsborough, and they have a website, and you can get the 3mm LEDs from them. Usually when I talk about that, I caution people about getting really, really, really bright UV LEDs and they're available. I mean, you can measure it in watts. The problem is they're way too bright and they'll burn your eyes. So in this particular case, buying really crummy UV LEDs is a great idea because you don't want to run them really bright and you don't need them really bright.
Okay.
Anyway, the place is called surplusgizmos.com and you can order them from there, 3mm UV LEDs.
Any further questions?
When's the next meeting? We're not doing one in December, right?
Correct. January, third weekend.
Third weekend in January. All right. Well, hope to see some of you.
I got a question. Did you prefer 1 o'clock or did you prefer 10 a.m.?
I prefer 1 o'clock. I work Saturdays, so it makes it easier for me to actually attend if I can do one, but that's just me.
Not hearing anything opposed to that, I think we're going to keep it at 1 o'clock. All right.
I hope to see some of you on the was it 4th there at the Rick Riall show. So
I'll be there.
All right.
And then I've got a regional meeting. The regional staff meeting is that afternoon. You may see me on my phone at the Rick Riall swap meet. All right, Philip, Larry, see everybody. Thank you for coming.
Guys.
Video
Bye-bye.
will be up whenever I get it up.